After a fortnight, Anthony and Gloria began to indulge in practical discussions, as they called those sessions when under the guise of severe realism they walked in an eternal moonlight. Not as much as I do you, the critic of Belles Lettres would insist. If you really loved me, you'd want everyone to know it. I do, she protested. I want to stand on the street corner like a sandwich man, informing all the passers-by. Then tell me all the reasons why you're going to marry me in June. Well, because you're so clean. You're sort of blowy clean, like I am. There's two sorts, you know. One's like Dick, he's clean like polished pans. You and I are clean like streams and winds. I can tell whenever I see a person whether he is clean, and if so, which kind of clean he is. We're twins. Ecstatic thought. Mother says, she hesitated uncertainly, Mother says that two souls are sometimes created together and in love before they're born. Bilphism gained its easiest convert. After a while he lifted up his head and laughed soundlessly toward the ceiling. When his eyes came back to her, he saw that she was angry. Why did you laugh? She cried. You've done that twice before. There's nothing funny about our relation to each other. I don't mind playing the fool, and I don't mind having you do it, but I can't stand it when we're together. I'm sorry. Oh, don't say you're sorry. If you can't think of anything better than that, just keep quiet. I love you. I don't care. There was a pause. Anthony was depressed. At length Gloria murmured, I'm sorry I was mean. You weren't. I was the one. Peace was restored. The ensuing moments were so much more sweet and sharp and poignant. They were stars on this stage, each playing to an audience of two. The passion of their pretense created the actuality. Here, finally, was the quintessence of self-expression, yet it was probable that for the most part their love expressed Gloria rather than Anthony. He felt often like a scarcely tolerated guest at a party she was giving. Telling Mrs. Gilbert had been an embarrassed matter. She sat stuffed into a small chair and listened with an intense and very blinky sort of concentration. She must have known it. For 3 weeks Gloria had seen no one else, and she must have noticed that this time there was an authentic difference in her daughter's attitude. She had been given special deliveries to post. She had heeded, as all mothers seem to heed, the hither end of telephone conversations, disguised but still rather warm. Yet she had delicately professed surprise and declared herself immensely pleased. She doubtless was. So were the geranium plants blossoming in the window boxes, and so were the cabbies when the lovers sought the romantic privacy of hansom cabs, quaint device, and the state bill of fares on which they scribbled "You know I do," pushing it over for the other to see. But between kisses Anthony and this golden girl quarreled incessantly. Now, Gloria, he would cry, please let me explain. Don't explain. Kiss me. I don't think that's right. If I hurt your feelings, we ought to discuss it. I don't like this kiss and forget. But I don't want to argue. I think it's wonderful that we can kiss and forget, and when we can't, it'll be time to argue. At one time some gossamer difference attained such bulk that Anthony arose and punched himself into his overcoat. For a moment it appeared that the scene of the preceding February was to be repeated, but knowing how deeply she was moved he retained his dignity with his pride, and in a moment Gloria was sobbing in his arms, her lovely face miserable as a frightened little girl's. Meanwhile they kept unfolding to each other, unwillingly, by curious reactions and evasions, by distastes and prejudices and unintended hints of the past. The girl was proudly incapable of jealousy and, because he was extremely jealous, this virtue piqued him. He told her recondite incidents of his own life on purpose to arouse some spark of it, but to no avail. She possessed him now, nor did she desire the dead years. "Oh, Anthony," she would say, "always when I'm mean to you I'm sorry afterward. I give my right hand to save you one little moment's pain." And in that instant her eyes were brimming and she was not aware that she was voicing an illusion. Yet Anthony knew that there were days when they hurt each other purposely, taking almost a delight in the thrust. Incessantly she puzzled him, 1 hour so intimate and charming, striving desperately toward an unguessed, transcendent union, the next, silent and cold, apparently unmoved by any consideration of their love or anything he could say. Often he would eventually trace these portentous reticences to some physical discomfort of these she never complained until they were over, or to some carelessness or presumption in him, or to an unsatisfactory dish at dinner, but even then the means by which she created the infinite distances she spread about herself were a mystery, buried somewhere back in those 22 years of unwavering pride. "Why do you like Muriel?" he demanded one day. "I don't very much." "Then why do you go with her?" "Just for someone to go with. They're no exertion, those girls. They sort of believe everything I tell them, but I rather like Rachel. I think she's cute and so clean and slick, don't you? I used to have other friends in Kansas City and at school, casual, all of them, girls who just flitted into my range and out of it for no more reason than that boys took us places together. They didn't interest me after environment stopped throwing us together. Now they're mostly married. What does it matter, they were all just people." "You like men better, don't you?" "Oh, much better. I've got a man's mind." "You've got a mind like mine. Not strongly gendered either way." Later she told him about the beginnings of her friendship with Blokeman. One day in Delmonico's, Gloria and Rachel had come upon Blokeman and Mr. Gilbert having luncheon, and curiosity had impelled her to make it a party of 4. She had liked him rather. He was a relief from younger men, satisfied as he was with so little. He humored her and he laughed, whether he understood her or not. She met him several times, despite the open disapproval of her parents, and within a month he had asked her to marry him, tendering her everything from a villa in Italy to a brilliant career on the screen. She had laughed in his face and he had laughed too. But he had not given up. To the time of Anthony's arrival in the arena he had been making steady progress. She treated him rather well, except that she had called him always by an invidious nickname, perceiving, meanwhile, that he was figuratively following along beside her as she walked the fence, ready to catch her if she should fall. The night before the engagement was announced she told Blokeman. It was a heavy blow. She did not enlighten Anthony as to the details, but she implied that he had not hesitated to argue with her. Anthony gathered that the interview had terminated on a stormy note, with Gloria very cool and unmoved lying in her corner of the sofa and Joseph Blokeman of films par excellence pacing the carpet with eyes narrowed and head bowed. Gloria had been sorry for him, but she had judged it best not to show it. In a final burst of kindness she had tried to make him hate her, there at the last. But Anthony, understanding that Gloria's indifference was her strongest appeal, judged how futile this must have been. He wondered, often but quite casually, about Blokeman. Finally he forgot him entirely. Heyday. One afternoon they found front seats on the sunny roof of a bus and rode for hours from the fading square up along the sullied river, and then, as the stray beams fled the westward streets, sailed down the turgid avenue, darkening with ominous bees from the department stores. The traffic was clotted and gripped in a patternless jam. The buses were packed 4 deep like platforms above the crowd as they waited for the moan of the traffic whistle. "Isn't it good?" cried Gloria. "Look!" A miller's wagon, stark white with flour, driven by a powdery clown, passed in front of them behind a white horse and his black teammate. "What a pity," she complained, "they'd look so beautiful in the dusk, if only both horses were white. I'm mighty happy just this minute, in this city. Anthony shook his head in disagreement. I think the city's a mountebank. Always struggling to approach the tremendous and impressive urbanity ascribed to it. Trying to be romantically metropolitan. I don't. I think it is impressive. Momentarily. But it's really a transparent, artificial sort of spectacle. It's got its press agent stars and its flimsy, unenduring stage settings and, I'll admit, the greatest army of supers ever assembled. He paused, laughed shortly, and added, technically excellent, perhaps, but not convincing. I'll bet policemen think people are fools, said Gloria thoughtfully, as she watched a large but cowardly lady being helped across the street. He always sees them frightened and inefficient and old they are, she added. And then, we'd better get off. I told Mother I'd have an early supper and go to bed. She says I look tired, damn it. I wish we were married, he muttered soberly. There'll be no good night then and we can do just as we want. Won't it be good? I think we ought to travel a lot. I want to go to the Mediterranean and Italy. And I'd like to go on the stage sometime, say for about a year. You bet. I'll write a play for you. Won't that be good? And I'll act in it. And then sometime when we have more money, old Adam's death was always thus tactfully alluded to, we'll build a magnificent estate, won't we? Oh, yes, with private swimming pools. Dozens of them. And private rivers. Oh, I wish it were now. Odd coincidence, he had just been wishing that very thing. They plunged like divers into the dark eddying crowd and emerging in the cool 50s sauntered indolently homeward, infinitely romantic to each other. Both were walking alone in a dispassionate garden with a ghost found in a dream. Halcyon days like boats drifting along slow-moving rivers, spring evenings full of a plaintive melancholy that made the past beautiful and bitter, bidding them look back and see that the loves of other summers long gone were dead with the forgotten waltzes of their years. Always the most poignant moments were when some artificial barrier kept them apart. In the theater their hands would steal together, join, give and return gentle pressures through the long dark. In crowded rooms they would form words with their lips for each other's eyes, not knowing that they were but following in the footsteps of dusty generations, but comprehending dimly that if truth is the end of life, happiness is a mode of it, to be cherished in its brief and tremulous moment. And then, one fairy night, May became June. 16 days now, 15, 14. 3 digressions. Just before the engagement was announced, Anthony had gone up to Tarrytown to see his grandfather, who, a little more wizened and grisly as time played its ultimate chuckling tricks, greeted the news with profound cynicism. "Oh, you're going to get married, are you?" He said this with such a dubious mildness and shook his head up and down so many times that Anthony was not a little depressed. While he was unaware of his grandfather's intentions, he presumed that a large part of the money would come to him. A good deal would go in charities, of course, a good deal to carry on the business of reform. "Are you going to work?" "Why?" temporized Anthony, somewhat disconcerted. "I am working. You know." "Ah, I mean work," said Adam Patch dispassionately. "I'm not quite sure yet what I'll do. I'm not exactly a beggar, Grandpa," he asserted with some spirit. The old man considered this with eyes half closed. Then almost apologetically he asked, "How much do you save a year?" "Nothing so far." "And so after just managing to get along on your money, you've decided that by some miracle two of you can get along on it?" "Gloria has some money of her own. Enough to buy clothes." "How much?" Without considering this question impertinent, Anthony answered it. About 100 a month. That's altogether about 7,500 a year. Then he added softly, it ought to be plenty. If you have any sense, it ought to be plenty. But the question is whether you have any or not. I suppose it is. It was shameful to be compelled to endure this pious browbeating from the old man, and his next words were stiffened with vanity. I can manage very well. You seem convinced that I'm utterly worthless. At any rate, I came up here simply to tell you that I'm getting married in June. Goodbye, sir. With this he turned away and headed for the door, unaware that in that instant his grandfather, for the first time, rather liked him. Wait, called Adam Patch, I want to talk to you. Anthony faced about. Well, sir? Sit down. Stay all night. Somewhat mollified, Anthony resumed his seat. I'm sorry, sir, but I'm going to see Gloria tonight. What's her name? Gloria Gilbert. New York girl? Someone you know? She's from the Middle West. What business her father in? In a celluloid corporation or trust or something. They're from Kansas City. You going to be married out there? Why, no, sir. We thought we'd be married in New York rather quietly. Like to have the wedding out here? Anthony hesitated. The suggestion made no appeal to him, but it was certainly the part of wisdom to give the old man, if possible, a proprietary interest in his married life. In addition, Anthony was a little touched. That's very kind of you, Grandpa, but wouldn't it be a lot of trouble? Everything's a lot of trouble. Your father was married here, but in the old house. Why, I thought he was married in Boston. Adam Patch considered. That's true. He was married in Boston. Anthony felt a moment's embarrassment at having made the correction, and he covered it up with words. Well, I'll speak to Gloria about it. Personally, I'd like to, but of course it's up to the Gilberts, you see. His grandfather drew a long sigh, half closed his eyes, and sank back in his chair. In a hurry, he asked in a different tone. Not especially. I wonder, began Adam Patch, looking out with a mild, kindly glance at the lilac bushes that rustled against the windows, I wonder if you ever think about the afterlife. Why, sometimes. I think a great deal about the afterlife. His eyes were dim, but his voice was confident and clear. I was sitting here today thinking about what's lying in wait for us, and somehow I began to remember an afternoon nearly 65 years ago, when I was playing with my little sister Annie, down where that summer house is now. He pointed out into the long flower garden, his eyes trembling of tears, his voice shaking. I began thinking, and it seemed to me that you ought to think a little more about the afterlife. You ought to be steadier. He paused and seemed to grope about for the right word, more industrious. Why? Then his expression altered, his entire personality seemed to snap together like a trap, and when he continued the softness had gone from his voice. Why, when I was just 2 years older than you, he rasped with a cunning chuckle, I sent 3 members of the firm of Wren and Hunt to the poorhouse. Anthony started with embarrassment. Well, goodbye, added his grandfather suddenly, you'll miss your train. Anthony left the house unusually elated, and strangely sorry for the old man, not because his wealth could buy him neither youth nor digestion, but because he had asked Anthony to be married there, and because he had forgotten something about his son's wedding that he should have remembered.